Welcome to the Steering Change Podcast, navigating through the commercial transportation industry in Alberta and beyond, powered by the Alberta Motor Transport Association. Here's your host, Kelsey Hipkin.
Hello, listeners of Steering Change. AMTA has started a quarterly series of campaigns focused on safety. While the main focus of these campaigns relates to commercial transportation, there's also a lot of education and tips when it comes to the motoring public. We started out with distracted driving from January to March, and our current campaign is all about helping commercial drivers and the motoring public stay sharp during the seasonal shift, when conditions might look clear, but dangers can be hiding just around the bend. In the words of Doug Walton, who put together the promo for this campaign, whether you're a professional behind the wheel, the trusted mechanic under the hood, or the people on the ground making it happen, take this season to reset, refocus, and spring into safety. To that end, we put together 3 segments for this particular episode, all focusing on those conditions drivers start to experience during the spring season. We were lucky enough to be joined by Sergeant Scott Kallweit, Acting Inspector, Fish and Wildlife Enforcement Services with the Alberta Sheriff's Branch, Sergeant Kerry Bates, Traffic Safety Unit with Edmonton Police Service, and Josh Hannaberry, Senior Advisor, Strategic Partnerships, AMTA. Let's spring into those segments, and we'll start with Inspector Kallweit. We are now joined by Sergeant Scott Kallweit of the Fish and Wildlife Enforcement Services within the Alberta Sheriffs. Thank you for joining us, Sergeant Kallweit.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm going to ask you a few questions here about wildlife strikes. To start, how common are wildlife strikes on Alberta highways and roadways?
Well, I'd say generally speaking, they are quite common. And some of the statistics that I've seen and taken from the Government of Alberta website is that in rural Alberta, they account for somewhere up between 50 and 60% of reported vehicle collisions.
Oh, wow.
And I think most of that is from like rural Alberta. But, working in the city here in Calgary, I can pretty confidently say that would probably transfer to within some of our large municipalities as well, where we have, a pretty healthy mule deer, white-tailed deer, and even moose population.
And Sergeant Kallweit, what are some of the leading causes of these strikes?
Well, most of the time, I think it's just, wildlife behave like wildlife. So when it comes to avoidance, we see that they can be pretty unpredictable. I think most drivers can, probably say they've had an experience where they've been driving, they've seen a deer or moose or elk or something on the side of the road. And as soon as the vehicle is approaching it, the wildlife are trying to decide what to do and where to go, where's the safe route to take, which inevitably causes them to behave erratically, which is, I think, one of the issues that we see in why these animals are getting struck. And sometimes what we're also seeing is that where there's one animal crossing, there often is a couple crossing. So the driver may see the first animal, but not necessarily see the next one crossing behind it.
Awesome. And are there more common times of year that wildlife strikes occur?
What I would say is that, wildlife like to move more around the dawn and dusk type times of day. So earlier in the morning when the sun is coming up, we generally see wildlife moving around more. And then again, near dusk. So the bad side for drivers is that these are during the times when, visibility is decreased. So not only are the animals moving around more, but they're also moving at those low light times.
And that kind of plays into my last question here. What can motorists, and in this case, especially commercial drivers, do to try and combat wildlife strikes?
Well, there's, I think just one of the biggest things is just being a defensive driver, right? Just like we're expected to look out for other hazards on the roadways, avoiding other drivers, maybe other bad drivers or distracted drivers. There is the expectation that we are looking out for all those other hazards, including wildlife. And so driving defensively means, to me at least, reducing speed. Speed, as we all know, is we have speed limits for a reason, and part of that reason is to avoid hazards like wildlife, right? We also have some other tactics like driving with high beams on during those times of low light, again, when wildlife are moving around dusk and dawn. So using the advantage of projecting more light, using your high beams to illuminate more of the roadway, illuminate more of the ditches where we're often seeing wildlife crossing. And some of the other things like, again, being a defensive driver is just that constant scanning of the surroundings. Again, one deer in the ditch usually means to me that there's going to be other ones. Mm-hmm. So where there's one, expect there to be more. And then, again, those other things where wildlife collisions are unavoidable, it's wearing a seatbelt, avoiding swerving, which puts the driver at risk of potentially colliding with another hazard or causing them to lose control of the vehicle. So some of the strategies that are recommended there are, travel to where the animal is, because again, wildlife are going to behave erratically, especially when they're trying to avoid a collision. So inevitably, if you drive to where the animal isn't, the animal's going to move into that direction. So that's where the recommendation is that you drive to where the animal is, apply the brakes without swerving, and then in some occasions you just may have to brace for impact. But by not swerving, you're not putting yourself or other motorists at an increased risk of causing a collision with one of those secondary hazards.
Yeah, you make a really interesting point there, because I'm thinking to myself, if I was ever in that case, the natural inclination would be to swerve to avoid, but it's kind of go at it instead.
Right, and then applying the brakes like as you would learn in avoiding any other collision, right? Because those wildlife, again, from my own experience and talking to people who have hit deer on the road, they're gonna keep moving. They're gonna stop. They're gonna start. They're gonna be completely unpredictable. And so trying to swerve to where they are not isn't necessarily going to solve the issue. But I mean, these are pointers that at the end of the day, sometimes it's going to be unavoidable.
Thank you so much, Sergeant Kallweit. We covered some ground today and some really important points. In our discussions before, you did cover, if someone wanted to find out more or search more resources, is that available?
You bet. So the government of Alberta has a pretty extensive animal vehicle collision safety program. And if you just Google search, the animal vehicle collision safety in Alberta, something along those lines, it'll direct you to the government of Alberta website, where it actually has pretty significant information on the projects that the government of Alberta is working on to mitigate wildlife vehicle collisions. And that's run through the Ministry of Transportation and Economic Corridors. So they actually have staff there that look at a significant amount of data to look at areas where we have high wildlife vehicle collisions, and then they can use the data they have to implement programs of better mitigation in those high risk areas.
Amazing. And for our listeners, we're going to put that information in the show notes for you as well. Sergeant Kallweit, we really appreciate you taking the time. It sounds like we have a full episode in future with this one as well.
Well, thanks again for having me.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We are joined by Sergeant Kerry Bates with the Traffic Safety Unit for the Edmonton Police Service. Thank you for joining us, Sergeant Bates.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks very much.
Sergeant Bates, thank you for joining us. Let's start with, are there any highway or roadway trends that you see when winter turns to spring?
Well, every year when the winter weather kind of subsides and the roads dry up, it seems like an increase in traffic volumes, whether that's true or not, or the traffic's just moving a little quicker. But with the good roadways, of course, then the speeds tend to pick up because people aren't as concerned about slippery roads and what have you. And that's the biggest thing that I notice anyway. And drivers, just due to that increased volumes, need to to pay a little more attention, not that they shouldn't be in the winter as well, but just pay a little more attention to their environment around them while they're driving and react accordingly.
And with that warmer weather and increased volume, do you notice an increase in any particular infractions?
I think speed is probably the obvious infraction as the roads get better and people are a little more confident that they can stop and accelerate and turn corners quickly and what have you, that it's probably the biggest one. And the infractions we're able to see maybe more obvious maybe, or distracted driving violations that, due to sloppy roads and frosty windows and what have you, and less daylight hours too. You may not immediately be aware of them over the winter. So those things become more apparent to us as well.
Awesome. And as you mentioned, with that volume, we're also starting to see more motorcycles on the road. Do you have any recommendations for motorcycles and the motoring public, especially commercial vehicles, when it comes to sharing the road?
Motorcycles we strongly suggest that people, because of our climate, unless you're someone that winters in Arizona, you probably haven't touched your motorcycle in 5 months or 6 months, maybe even. But just to start out slow, drive to your ability. Even first time or two out, start out your ride with a trip to a vacant large parking lot and just do a few circles and loops and practice your balance and get feeling comfortable on your bike again before you get out on the roads with the traffic volumes that we have.
And can you talk a bit about blind spots when it comes to motorcycles?
Yeah, for certain. They're obviously of the vehicles on the road, they're aside from bicycles and pedestrians, they're probably the most vulnerable of vehicles. If there is a collision with a car or a large semi or whatever, you're obviously coming out second in that collision. But for sure, be aware of blind spots, I guess, is one thing for any vehicle, but especially large trucks with their large side views. That I'm sure the blind spots for those truck drivers is probably larger than your average car. Be aware when you're passing not to ride in that blind spot. Don't stay there when you're passing. Get by as quickly as you can and move back over and slow down again. But just for a safety sake, just to get by them quickly. Make sure your headlights are working on a high beam, probably in the daylight hours, just so you're readily visible. If they glimpse through the mirror and they see a bright light, then they'll know you're there. It only takes them a second or two to check those mirrors. And make sure when you're going by that they aren't signaling to make a lane change in one direction or the other, or a turn or slowing down. Just be aware of all those things. Truck drivers got a big machine they're running and lots of things to pay attention to as well. So you can't just count or be assuming that another vehicle is going to be watching out for your safety all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some really important points there. And I am going to throw one last one at you. Is there anything you'd like to add just kind of when it comes to this time of year that's important for motorists to be aware of?
Just generally, I guess, when spring arrives, just watch your speed, be aware of it. Be aware of the distracted driving laws. Those are a big concern for collisions. And following too close is another one that's a major ingredient in our collisions in the urban areas anyway. Probably about 50 to 60% of our collisions are as a result of rear end collisions, whether it's inattention or following too close. But give yourself that time to react if you're following traffic. And those are probably the bigger ones, collision wise.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time.
Great. Thank you.
Josh, thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's awesome to be back. Thank you very much for having me.
Josh, we know you from AMTA. You come at industry from a safety perspective. You have some history in insurance as well. Can you kind of delve into your expertise on being a Class 1 driver?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll actually dive more into professional driver if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's actually how I got into the industry. Was first it was landscaping, and then I ended up driving a truck. It wasn't a Class 1 at that time, and I've been very fortunate throughout my career to operate many different types of vehicles, so commercial vehicles, as well as the equipment. So I spent a lot of my time, if I wasn't oil and gas hauling, it was equipment hauling. So yeah, I spent a lot of time, and it was an eye-opener. I remember the first time I got trained. Not just to get my license. I remember the first time an employer trained me to do good in my job. And that's when I actually got hooked to safety. Was very much just like, wow, I matter. And wow, this piece of equipment that I'm operating, so that really did a really good job just painting a picture of the importance that I bring as well as just the human factor to me. Like, I matter. I need to be I need to go home safely. But yeah, then I spent a lot of time taking just various training. So if it's oil field specific, if it's site specific, but yeah, spending a lot of time just kind of honing those skills and trying different things, and yeah, not biting off too much that I felt like I wasn't able to perform was also important. But having good mentors that would actually encourage that versus the opposite, where come on, Ricky, you can do it kind of thing. It's like, no, you will get there, but we're going to make sure you get there the right way and safely.
Wonderful. And let's do a shout out to those safety and leadership mentors out there. Thanks for all you do, guys.
Agreed. 100%.
Wonderful. So let's start. Is there specific prep that commercial drivers need to do when they are transitioning from spring to winter?
Absolutely, there is. I think the most important thing is don't lose focus on what's most important, and that's arriving safely. I think sometimes the disconnect that happens between there's snow, there's ice, and all of a sudden it's sunshine and no snow, no ice, dry roads, is you go a little faster and you start forgetting a little bit more of defensive driving. But my encouragement is definitely don't lose focus. But another thing too is keep in mind that passenger vehicles that the common day people would drive might lose focus of, there's dry roads and there's less distractions because I'm not going to slip and slide. So they're not necessarily, operating at the same type of attentiveness as that they should. But you're the professional. So as long as you're focused on arriving alive, then you're good.
You're exactly right. We talked to EPS, and Sergeant Bates was mentioning how just because the roads are clear, people aren't maybe paying attention as much. They're not as alert as when there may be icy or snowy conditions. So I think you make a really valid point there.
Can I hit something quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing too that I think is super important to exactly that point is when the roads get nicer, the weather is nicer, construction starts happening, the RVs start cruising. So when other people are losing focus on that, I think it's just even that much more important to make sure that you're paying attention. But yeah, it's good.
Absolutely. So be aware and stay safe out there, everyone. So on that kind of note, we're being aware while we're on the road. What do we need to be aware of before we even get on the road? Does pre-trip change as well?
I think the opportunities. So I know what it's like to pre-trip when it's really, really cold, and as thorough as I thought I was, you're not nearly as thorough as when the weather is just a little bit nicer. The other thing when you're pre-tripping your vehicle and why it's super important once the snow and ice is gone is snow, ice, road grime. It gets stuck on things like the subframe and underneath your axles and all that good stuff where you're not actually able to see everything because you're not using a hammer and a chisel to make it exposed. So doing a really thorough check on making sure there's no little hairline cracks or that your nuts are actually tight and there's no like rust watermarks, that kind of stuff. That's super important. The other thing too is mid-trip inspections. I think a lot of times you think, I did a great thorough pre-trip inspection before I left, I'm good to go. There's many times throughout your trip, doesn't matter if you're local or long haul, where you can stop. And those are the great times just to do a quick inspection again, making sure that, I can actually see under this because it's light now versus when it was dark, that kind of stuff.
And really kind of a good point there too. Like we are talking about commercial drivers, obviously, but for the motoring public out there as well, this is a great time for you. Have you checked your tires? How's your pressure? Topping up your gas? Is your washer fluid your spring washer fluid, not your winter washer fluid? Just small things like that.
That's right. Actually, it's interesting when you think about the windshield where, when I was still driving, when I managed a big fleet, we call it the bullets, like little rocks that apparently were in the sand to make our roads a little more, I guess, sticky. All of a sudden, those bullets are hitting your windshields. And through the wintertime, there's still a law and legislation around windshield safety, of course. But yeah, that's a perfect time to say, hey, my windshield does need to get replaced. I don't need to risk that anymore. And I'm glad you mentioned washer fluid because we got those little flash rains and stuff where things kind of get dirty. So making sure that that's topped up with the right type of fluid.
It was timely because my light just came on to let me know it's time to change mine. So check that washer fluid, friends. So you've touched on earlier, we are talking about there is going to be more traffic. We have RVs, we have a lot of commercial vehicles. We're starting to see motorcycles. I passed a few on the highway this morning. Can you just touch on some tips for big rigs sharing the road with motorcycles and other vehicles?
Yeah, absolutely. A big thing that I used to coach and I still strongly believe is it starts before you get behind the wheel. So if there's things that you can do even before you leave your place, so if it's your house, if you're at a camp, whatever, before you get to your commercial vehicle to set yourself up for success, I think that's super important. So what I used to do is I put my clothes out the night before and I'd have most of my lunch packed. I leave my wallet, my keys in the same place, because the moment that you're panicked in the morning that you're going to be late for something, that mentality, it follows you. So if you have a good, calm, cool, collected head before you actually depart to do your pre-trip inspection, if you're dealing with dispatch, get your paperwork, that kind of stuff, that's really important, because then you can be more attentive to. I also passed the motor. Well, actually I lied. They passed me this morning. And one of them, I think they call it the burp, where they just rev it up so you can hear them. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so making sure that your head is on a swivel, especially if you're pulling a trailer where there's just different noises, you have a louder engine, that kind of stuff. Because yeah, at the end of the day, you can't always see that you have blind spots. So as long as you're doing your due diligence, if it's checking left, checking right, checking like constant, that's super important. But other things too that impact your ability to navigate around motorcycles and other passenger vehicles is speed and traveling distance. So when there's more traffic, it's okay to slow down. Like maybe like not excessively slow down, but give yourself some space so that way if you have to respond, you have the room to do so.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Josh, for your knowledge and your time. Is there anything you'd like to add on springing into safety?
I think the biggest thing is just to make sure that you do everything you can to arrive safely.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Josh. I'd like to take a quick other moment to thank Scott, Kerry, and Josh for their time in those 3 segments you just listened to. As we get closer and closer to summer, let's all take our time on the roads and get to where we need to safely. Moving on to some AMTA news. AMTA's Drawdown Dinner is returning. We will see you October 16th at the River Cree Resort and Casino for networking, dinner, entertainment, and prizes. Registration opens in July, so keep an eye on amta.ca. Have you ever wondered what exactly is involved with an AMTA membership? Reach out to us at membership@amta.ca with any questions you might have surrounding supplier, associate carrier, full carrier, and AMTA Elite memberships. And as always, my friends, be safe out there.
Thank you for listening to this episode of AMTA's Steering Change Podcast. The views expressed by guests of the Steering Change Podcast are their own and may not reflect the views of AMTA, its hosts, or sponsors. Did you have a question that you would like answered on an upcoming episode of the Steering Change Podcast? We want to hear from you. To submit a question to the Steering Change Mailbag, hit up our DMs on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram with the hashtag Steering Change, and your question will be answered either live on the podcast or by one of our SMEs here at AMTA. We ask that you share this episode with those in your network that could benefit from what we discussed today, and make sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform so you can be notified when future episodes are released. You can learn more about us and our mission by visiting www.amta.ca. Now get out there and have a safe day.